I think made on Gabriola to me means made by hand, made well, made fueled by creativity, not fueled by money or, I mean, it is, everything is, but it's not the main thing. Like, the people here doing art are here because they love doing art.
I'm imagining people who love their homes, people in location, in place, and connected to place in interesting ways.
We've branded ourselves the Isle of the Arts, and it's not just about having a high concentration of artists. It's about having a place where, because of the open attitudes and the casualness of it, it sort of fosters creativity.
And it draws in a lot of artists and a lot of, again, people who want to feel the freedom. If you can call it that. You're still trapped by normal trappings. And, but you just seem to have more control over it. You seem to have more time.
Rather than trying to make 100 of the same item be exactly the same, which is the efficient way to do it, I make each instrument have its own voice and be unique.
There's so many craftsmen on this island. I was saying to my daughter the other day, I said the one thing I think I've learned from living here is how much integrity it takes to do the simplest things.
So Gabriola is a very rich community of makers, of artists and artisans, and partly because of the environment. This space inspires art. It inspires creativity, and the natural beauty of the island creates a space for people to be creative and to make things. There's also a very supportive community. Artists and makers support each other, help each other, trade products with each other, and so there's a very strong support network that way. And then the community at large values the work that they do, whether they want to learn from them, they want to own and appreciate and use the items that they make. It's supported on all levels in the community.
I used to spend my commute to my desk job drawing and sketching jewelry and reading jewelry books, and I'd get home and call my mom and ask her how to do things, and it just evolved from there. So it started as a hobby about 11 years ago. It had always been in my life, but never an option as a career, and I really don't know why.
I've been on Gabriola for 10 years now. I arrived here from Montreal to attend the Silva Bay Shipyard School. I knew very little about the island, actually. I feel like I was very fortunate in having ended up in a place that was just perfect for me, and it worked out in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated. And a lot of that has to do with, the culture of people making and crafting here, which it seems strange now to have been entirely unaware of it, but I kind of walked into the ideal situation for myself. In a lot of ways, the infrastructure set up here, casually speaking, for people to pursue their craft independently. Which you don't really see in a lot of other places, or you do, but it's less accessible. And something about the combination of being a small community that's somewhat isolated, but we have access to larger places. Vancouver, Victoria, we have the tourist population that comes in the summer. It makes it all very doable.
everything's just slower here, and yeah, we have the time and solitude to kind of make our businesses exactly what we want them to be.
It's a place where it's easier to just focus on a few things, but just to go deeper in those things. You know, it's easier to filter out influences that you might be more susceptible to if you're in a larger area.
One thing that I do like about being on this island is that I don't have those influences. I'm not competing with like Pandora or all the made in China stuff, and my rent would be higher for my studio. My audience might be higher end, you know, like I can't think of anywhere on this island where you could buy a ring for over $500.
So the advantage for me of being here is, well, the isolation, you know, and you can do it selectively. If you're not isolated to a point where, you know, you're going stir crazy, you can pick and choose.
I think it would feel like a job in a city. Like you get up, you take the bus, you go to your thing, you go out and get your Starbucks coffee and you go to your shop. Whereas here it's like, I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It feels more like part of a lifestyle here. I just moved to BC and I got my first job at a design firm in Nanaimo, and I thought, what could I do from home? What can I, and it, like a light bulb, I just thought, jewelry, of course. Like my mom's been a silversmith my entire life, for more than 40 years of her life, and she knows everything, and I've learned so much from her, just watching her in her studios when I was a kid. She used to take me to her studios when I was, 2 years old, and I've learned how to be a jeweler. And anyway, so I literally just called her out of the blue and I was like, Mom, can I come and just learn from you? And she said, sure. I'm a purist in what I do. I like making everything from scratch. I do all my own designs. I use traditional methods of silversmithing and traditional tools. And the process of traditional silversmithing has really not changed in hundreds of years. We're still using the same kinds of tools and same techniques as they did in the old days. And actually, traditionally, silversmithing was a man's job. Women doing that it's kind of a new thing. There's a lot of blood and blisters involved. We go through a lot of Band-Aids. Definitely have a lot of injuries, but it comes with the job. I'll never have nice nails There's a lot of sensory, tactile parts to silversmithing, and I know like the amount of tension that I have to put on something to bend it to a certain form, or to pinch something together, or to hammer. I like the big heavy-duty torch, the big guns. There's a lot of sounds in soldering, like the torch going on like that, and this sound of the torch starting. When I started making jewelry, those sounds, totally, it brought back memories of my childhood and listening to my mom do her silversmithing, the pop of the torch and the hiss of the flame, they're etched in my memory. And this, I'll show you the next cool sound. The acid. Well, actually that was pretty anticlimactic, but when you put a big piece that's really hot, it goes tss. So this is the sound that I like right here. That sound brings back memories. It's like the smell of drywall. It reminds me of my dad. And the sound of like It's called quenching, the sound of quenching reminds me of my mom. I like this part. I feel proud to be a woman who can use tools. I feel pretty honored to have been given this knowledge from my mother, of all people. My daughter once said to me, I said something like, "Hannah, babe, I've been working all day, I'm tired." And she goes, "You don't work, you just make jewelry." And sometimes I feel like that. It's like, yeah, I just make jewelry. I play all day.
The seasons influence the way I work for sure. A lot of it has to do with the rhythms of just busyness, tourist traffic. Fall and winter are more contemplative than the summer, so there are opportunities to sort of relax and try new things, but really what you're focused on is production because you're gearing up for a very busy season. Summer is very bustly and busy, so you tend to do more repetitive tasks. There's not a lot of time to explore new things. And that wonderful period after Christmas when your last craft show is done and you've had a chance to reboot, those next several months tend to be the time where you work on new things and try to develop new skills.
The Gabriola Thanksgiving Studio Tour is a self-guided tour of artist studios where people can pick up a brochure, look at a map of the island that shows where artists and artisans are doing their work and displaying and selling their work. Get in the car and drive around and visit those artists, talk to those artists, look at their tools. Many of them are actually demonstrating their work, so you can stay and watch them create a piece.
All right, so we're done with it on here. We're going to take it off the pipe and put it onto a punty.
And then you can get in the car and move on to the next. And so you can see in a weekend, you can see jewelers and potters and carvers and painters and glass blowers and all talking about making their works.
I don't really feel like, I don't really feel like I don't live on Gabe, because I'm here all the time. I moved here because it was quiet and beautiful and inexpensive, and I had been living on the road and living in big cities and living in the world of being a touring musician. And to me, the fact that it was quiet and beautiful and natural and undeveloped and inexpensive to live was why I moved here. Well, I built this shop to do what I do. And it's my home, Gabriola. This is where I fit in somehow. I don't know. But I don't know. The question comes up about living in. Do you live where you're awake or do you live where you're asleep? I spend my conscious time on Gabriola doing this. That's what I don't know. This is just seems to belong here. Yeah. I'm not all that crazy about talking about myself, but you know, what we are talking about, like the things about the slow movement and respecting craft and things like that, I'm actually really passionate about that. This commission is actually really, really special to me for a number of reasons. The man who commissioned it, he heard another one of this model, but he's never seen one because he's blind. So for me, this is very special for me, because his interest in it is a lot of what my interest is how it sounds and how it feels, and how it smells, and you know, it's tactile, it's balance. And one of the things that is very even more kind of poignant for me is that it's kind of a miracle of modern ophthalmology that I actually can see it all, which is really amazing. Yeah, so this instrument is designed and made on Gabriola. It's a Gabriola requinto, and it's got red cedar, ancient red cedar belly, and what we call yellow cedar back and ribs, all from very ancient wood and all from salvaged from the beach. And then the neck is made of true cedar, which is they call Cuban cedar or Honduran cedar. So 3 cedar. So one of the things that being an artisan, it teaches you is respect. And it teaches you respect for the people that came before you in your craft. You know, you had a question about artisans. What is the value of an artisan? I mean, part of it is just it's the distillation of knowledge and technique and awareness. And I mean, I think it's a value to society to have people that preserve traditional culture. There's a few reasons why what I do is really impractical, because it's slow and it's really holistic. But there are a few reasons why it's actually kind of valuable, in that because I'm not industrial, I can use a lot of the material that the industry overlooks. I can actually make an entire guitar out of what's out of the dumpster of a guitar factory. The holistic technology, and I approach it, this is kind of my approach. I start with materials that I salvage, and then I bring that to a point where it's a finished product. I know where the materials come from, how they were sourced, what they are, and then, you know, you do the process all the way through, and I do it in a very slow, low footprint, very low destructive element to the, you know, I mean, I do primarily by hand. I don't use toxic chemicals in my finishes. Yeah, so I mean, it's a little hard to change gears from planes to guitars, but that's what that's about.
I don't make things with my hands. I make I make things with words. I think there's a real need, a desire for authenticity and for the non-reproducible. And I think that as people, as we start to fear that maybe our own subjectivity, our own way of being is becoming more and more like these mass-produced easily reproduced objects, that we're becoming like easily reproduced people. And one of the ways we might try to resist that or correct that relation is to surround ourselves with handmade objects. There's a return to a kind of desire or a wish to encounter handmade objects. And I think that that's like definitely a response to oversaturation with mass-produced, cheap commodities. There's definitely something about an intentionality, right? For me, and I think for a lot of other people that I've talked to, it's actually a kind of exodus. It's a desertion, I think, from the city, from the metropolis. One of the things that drew me here had to do with a kind of, I guess, a spirit of autonomy and self-sufficiency and a kind of a slowness. Raymond Williams has this great line about the need for breathing space, places that are sort of outside of the systems of control. And I mean, we're never really outside of those systems, but for me, Gabriola and the islands have always been a place where people have assembled themselves so that they could live slowly and in a more autonomous, intentional way. Slowness allows for a more aesthetic, erotic apprehension of the world, a kind of grip on the world.
All right, so we're working on a pumpkin.
For me, it was a combination of a lot of hours in the darkroom and watching a special on glass blowing on CBC. I always felt in the darkroom I was painting with light. And, you know, when you're dodging and burning and carrying on like that. And then I watched this glass blower working, and it was like he was sculpting with light. And I shared that joy with Marianne, and then she turned around and got my first fix.
Hello, please. Then after a while, I realized he wasn't going to stop, so if I wanted to spend any time with him, I better learn how also.
We do not sign our glass with our names. We sign our glass to dance glass. Because every piece we make, in our own minds at any way, is a collaborative undertaking. Doing this together is really a large part of the magic for us.
The pace, that's one of the things that really said it's time for me to leave Calgary now, is just the pace of the city picked up and up. We're not trying to get somewhere else. We're here, and we're able to let our sense of being here emerge through what we do. Now, lots of us do things with the ocean and the idea of the place that we're actually in, and sometimes we play with those images too, but it's perhaps more than just the representation of place. It's more of emergence from the experience of being here.
I suppose we could say there's more greens and blues in our work because of being here. What we see ourselves creating is perhaps not as geometrical as it might be if we were in the city. I think that urban living creates particular mental sort of metaphors and that one tends to riff on without even knowing it. And I think the rural landscape, the natural landscape does the same thing.
I think we're influenced, you're right, in unconscious ways about what we are surrounded by, the shapes and the lines.
Cityscapes tend to be a lot more angular, up and down, vertical lines, squares, rectangles. The landscape that we live in tends to be more rounded and softer, less metallic colors.
You know, as soon as the weather gets a bit nicer and, you know, my thoughts turn to starting the pottery year again. I was a construction engineer, surveyor in Australia, in heavy construction, and the last job I'd worked on there was in Sydney, was an expressway right through the middle of town. And I just, you know, wanted to see a bit of the world before I settled down to a life of that, etc. And got a job in Toronto on the Spadina Expressway. And it's like I could have walked off the end of the job in Sydney onto the state. It was exactly the same, 6 lanes right through a subdivision, through an old suburb. And the job sent me out to Vancouver. It was this time of year, about March. You know, it was just all grey snow and freezing in Toronto. And out here it was cherry blossoms and pretty girls and springs had sprung, and I just said, this is for me, and I've been in BC ever since. Back in the day when I first came here, there was only one potter, and it wasn't like there was lots of, you know, painters or weavers or anything. There wasn't much of anything really. It wasn't the Isle of the Arts 40 years ago. It was the Isle of cheap land and hippies gone to bush and resentful old farmers, really. And, you know, I'm saying that even, you know, 30 years ago, I mean, I was a working machine really then when I was young, and still, you know, there wasn't a living that was going to pay for my kids' dental costs. There just wasn't that kind of living in it. If you were happy living in the bush, being poor, you know, it would support that. But you know, it was why I took other work. I tell you what, there isn't a single pottery store in the Lower Mainland or Victoria operating now that was operating when I started potting. As retail rents rose in the Vancouver, Victoria area, you just can't get enough dollars per square foot on the shelves with pots. You know, this is bulky, heavy, and not very expensive. I've experienced people coming here wanting to buy things, but, you know, would you ship it to me in San Francisco? And many times, the cost of the shipping was more than the value of the the stuff inside. I just finally said, look, if you want my work, you've got to walk up my road. You know, I sometimes think, oh, I wish it was at a busy crossroads. But on the other hand, I don't really. I like to live here like this.
We should get the weed whacker.
Every year I do things with the school.
Okay, let's go. Can we get a wheelbarrow? Oh yeah, we need a wheelbarrow. Go get a wheelbarrow.
Hundreds of kids have been through here over the last 35 years. It's been the tradition at the school that the graduating class paints, you know, about a 10-foot square section of a concrete wall around the back of the school.
What do you guys try to do anyways? Dig clay. Okay.
Immediately, the idea coalesced into an entry portal that had welcome in English and Hokomimum, Nuilam, beside it. And then this, a clay button blanket. The whole thing's made up of these 4-inch tiles that we were making the other day. And each kid's making it individually, yet the whole thing's being pulled together by the fact that I'm just using these 2 colours to make sort of a patchwork quilt out of it. And across the bottom, a dedication to the students of tomorrow from the students of today, sort of thing. I love their unfettered imagination. It's like you look at little kids drawing. They don't think about whether I can draw, I can't draw. They just draw. And at some point in their development, we become inhibited, and then we can't draw. Somebody who could draw, now we can't. And, I just like to be part of getting in before that cliff. And, yes, you can. And here's how you can. And just the enthusiasm of kids and their knowing no boundaries, really. I really, really enjoy classes with kids. I mean, I love the fact that a couple of hours of pandemonium can, in the end, coalesce into this table full of quite lovely things, and that's really fun.
The islands collect people who are all interesting in their own way, and it's part of the reason that we love running a newspaper on the Gulf Islands, is because there's always a story to tell. Somebody's always doing something really interesting here. It's important to look at the buying local because you sometimes take a little extra time in talking to the person who made it and find out whether this is something that's appropriate for what you want to use it for. And there's also that sense of, there's the sense of pride that it came from your home community rather than from wherever in the world it might have been made instead. That's one of the biggest things people can do to make an impact on the community, is ask that question. Can I get it locally? I think the creativity runs through almost anybody that has to live on the Gulf Islands or chooses to live here, because by being an island, it forces you to get creative in how you do different things. We talk about incubators in the sense of the tech world. For Gabriola, what we have here is an incubator for the creative side, where people can get creative about anything. With the Isle of the Arts Festival, they come out and they share their techniques and such in workshops over the course of 9 or 10 days here on Gabriola, and locals attend those, visitors attend those. The workshop hosts themselves will often go to other workshops and learn new ways of doing things, and they're showing each other how to better do things, how to better make things, how to better create.
try to incorporate locally gathered materials just because it seems the right thing to do. It's more organic. People identify with it more. They can say, my gosh, that's just like the blackberries I tripped on yesterday when I was walking on that trail. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's nuisance stuff. I use ivy. Ivy is lovely to work with, but a lot of people really curse it, especially when it gets in their garden where they don't want it. And the blackberries are the same. I started making baskets in 2002. There was a group of us on the island that started by doing a project to raise money for the food bank. It was about 10 of us that were hooked, and we kept going. We meet every week. We have done since then. Meet every week in different people's homes and just make baskets together. I have always loved baskets, right? From when I was younger. I collected them, I bought them when I traveled, and I always wanted to know how to make them. And when this opportunity came up, it was perfect for me. I use daffodil leaves a lot, make them into a cordage. This is what you end up with, is the cordage that's got that lovely golden tinge to it. And then here we have cedar root, cedar bark. These are pine needles that I've gathered right here on my street. This is something I haven't mentioned, deer horn. I can drill into this and use it for the handle of a basket like that. This is cedar root, which is beautiful to work with. When it's wet, it's very pliable. You have an idea and you do it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, you do something else with this. It's very much a forgiving art form because you can shape almost anything when it's wet. And it dictates its own shape too. A lot of baskets have a mind of their own. And even though you're wanting to make it this shape, it might end up quite different and sometimes more pleasant than what you had in mind. Often, I'm reminded of back in the days when we first bought our place here, and there was a saying that rubber gumboots were what we all called Gabriola dancing shoes, because that was about as dressed up as people got here. So that's an aspect of this place that we've always loved, is that there is no pretense.
So how is it reflected in your craft, in your work?
Well, a lot of the materials I use are very humble, and at the time I started using them, I thought, who's going to pay you money for something that you've just gathered for nothing out of your garden or out of the forest? Certainly not going to do that. What's the point of bothering to do that? However, it has turned out to be just the opposite. People are much more enthralled with the things that I've made from natural, locally gathered materials than they are with the very symmetrical, perfect basket like what you can buy in Michael's or Pier 1.
Saturday is the busiest day. Well, say on a Saturday farmer's market, I would sell 10 times the bread that I would sell, say, in a Saturday in February. On the Saturday market in the summer, we'll make 11 different kinds, I guess. I think there's about 11 varieties, 10, 11 varieties of scones. And then at least 10 varieties of bread. I pre-shape the loaves, I shape the loaves, I put them into the oven, and I take them out of the oven and I put them in bags. So it's touched all the way along. So that's a big difference, I think, between what I do and what a big commercial bakery would do. I can see how the dough's reacting through every step of the process. At its worst, commercial bread is more like a meringue or a marshmallow because it's got so many different elements in the dough to make it do what time takes to do. And so they use conditioners and additives to replicate this time because they're in a hurry. Food, for the most part, is dead. You know, and I'd spent 25 years putting X's on protein, you know, grill marks. You know, I thought that cooking was diverse and that baking would be monotonous, but it's the complete opposite for me. I find even though you're doing the same basic thing with bread every day, there's such a diversity and a uniqueness. It's alive. That's the biggest thing. It's mentioned in a few different books, the slow rise method. And so I liked that name because most good things happen slowly. I wouldn't be doing this without support from the community, from the designer of the building itself, who did it at no cost. The only request was to donate bread to the food bank, which I continue to do, to a resident who lent me money to put on a down payment for the house because I was self-employed and no bank would lend me money, to the man that lives next door that cleared the lot and supplied the gravel, the sand, who never gave me a bill. So it's an incredible island from that perspective, and it's baking bread is in hindsight is a very fundamental way to give back to the community. You know, I've never had a job or done anything where people thank you on a weekly basis, if not more, for doing what I do. We were talking about the industrialization of things, and that certainly, I think, was the downfall of a lot of things, and bread as a utilitarian, or as a utility that is square and fits in a toaster and toasts quickly and efficiently, is become the norm for so many people that outside that box, it's foreign. Like the idea of having to cut bread as opposed to having it pre-sliced It takes away a certain connection with the product that you have. I can't imagine many people taking a loaf of store-bought, pre-sliced square bread and smelling it. Whereas if you take the loaf of bread that's been handmade and out of the bag and you've got to cut it, you first have to touch it and you probably look at the loaf. You know, there's a deeper connection that you have with the product. You know, I often use the term that I earn a lifestyle, not a living. You're not going to get very wealthy doing this, so you earn the ability to have a wonderful lifestyle here on the island.
We have a Saturday morning market from June through till October. Everything that is sold here, all the vendors are citizens of Gabriola or Mudge Islands. So everything has to be made or produced here. Made on Gabriola, it's a very West Coast feel. There are apparently more artists and artisans working and making a living on Gabriola than anywhere else in Canada.
Good morning.
Gabriola just encourages or attracts very creative people. If you have a group of something, of people doing their best kind of work, it attracts other people to come and do their best kind of work. So you get that, we feed off each other, we get encouragement from each other, people buy our goods. One of the things that I've noticed since I've been doing this is I still sell more every week to the locals than I do to the tourists, which constantly astonishes me. You know, the market fulfills a big place socially on the island.
Now the beauty of this is it gives me a lot of force to put these in place here, these screws. And the reason I'm using this over, say, a cordless drill is because I want to feel the tension that I'm applying to that screw so that I'm not breaking anything, but I also want to hear if I'm cracking anything or if anything's making an unusual noise that is not, it doesn't sound good and I'm gonna have to repair later. It's such an old school tool that is so functional and still has its place that people don't appreciate anymore. It's a little sail rowboat that somebody brought to me. His son built this boat down at the Port Townsend boat building school, and his son had unfortunately had passed away way before his time, and so the man who brought this to me has asked me to restore it for him in memory of his son. I was painting and doing artwork at the same time, and I was on the fence. I really wanted to do that more than the boat building. But then I got into doing, I started getting into more of the wood side of it, and I really saw the creative components to it. You know, it's like a three-dimensional sculpture, functional piece of sculpture. And I started seeing that side of it, and I really changed my point of view about it, and it wasn't just a job anymore. I started seeing it as a romantic world and really appreciating it. Wooden boats, if you maintain them, they'll stay true and strong for a long time. But if you let them drop for a year or two, they fall very quickly, and then they fall into disrepair very fast. And then to hire somebody to fix it is quite expensive. So that's where I come in, is I can teach those guys how to do it. I've started running some classes through my school now. So they're woodworking classes with a marine slant to them. So some of them are a basic introduction to woodworking, and then I'll teach other things like block making, block and pulleys, but I'm also doing other stuff that's fun for me as well, and that's like driftwood furniture making. So we can go to the local beaches and we can collect driftwood off the beach, and it's just this, we call it the beach depot, where you can just go pull this beautiful material up and build a simple furniture. I have a friend on the island here who mills up wood, and so I go buy a lot of my wood from him, and he's providing me wood that's from Gabriola, and then I turn around and make things out of that. But where would I find that anywhere else, and be able to have the luxury of going there and picking that out instead of having the next guy behind me trying to outbid me, or trying to buy it all because he just wants to hoard it away somewhere. So things are a little slower, and I appreciate that very much. I think the creative processes there's a lot of overlapping where you can take a lot of those skills, knowledge. I mean, for instance, for me to be able to paint a boat, because I've worked on boats for so long, I can actually see and make sure that it looks correct, because if the lines are off, the shape is slightly distorted for whatever reason, it can be quite irritating to a lot of people, especially if they know how boats are supposed to look.
When something is made by hand, it connects the maker with the material, for one, whether it's clay or wood or silver. There's an actual physical connection between the maker and the material. It also implies a uniqueness. The item that's made is it's not mass produced. It's a one-off. Even if it's made in a mold or to a pattern, each handmade item is going to be unique. It's going to have the actual mark of the maker on it because their hands have touched it. The value of artisan work in a community, particularly in a small community, is that it connects people to each other. When I go see a potter or a jeweler and I take a bowl or a cup from that potter, then I have a connection with them. Not only a financial transaction, but I have something. I have a bowl or a cup that I use every day, that I have my coffee out of in the morning, and so I'm always mindful of that creator. And then in this community, I also know that my neighbors and friends and people around the island are also using a Graham Sheehan bowl or cup, or are wearing jewelry made by Nina Turzin or by Laura Hanford. So we're all connected by the way we have and use and display these handmade items on the island. And so we're connected to the artist, we're connected to each other, we're connected to this place through the material.
When you're doing stuff like this, you're working with your hands, you're using material that has been has evolved with humankind throughout the history of our existence on this planet. So to have a disconnect from this and not appreciate it or not learn it, I think is really unfortunate. I think kids need to be playing with wood, and they need to be playing with other materials that brings them back to who we are.
They see that we value this work, and we value the artist, we value the process, and that's creating the next generation of artists and makers, or the next generation of people who will appreciate and value art and artists.